So we see in Ottawa, we see in Vancouver, we've seen in Toronto, disaster after disaster. And you really have to ask yourselves, when are we going to stop relying on government contractors to deliver these projects when they go crazy over budget and they're just hammering taxpayers?
Hey everyone, I'm Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation here in Ottawa, with my colleague and my friend Jay Goldberg. He is our Ontario Director, and we're going to be talking about Metrolinx today. And for you who are wondering just what Metrolinx is, well, it's basically the government of Ontario's transit contractor. Okay, so the provincial government puts it in charge of all of its major transit construction projects. Now, Jay, you were telling me offline that there's some huge cost overruns that Metrolinx is dealing with here that actually would cost 8 brand new hospitals.
Yeah, so Metrolinx, basically the record here in Ontario has been a complete disaster. The newest story, of course, is that the Doug Ford government is building the Ontario line, which is going to be right through the heart of Toronto, a brand new subway line. The original cost was pegged at just under $12 billion. It's now hit $20 billion, and they are still years and years behind schedule. So it's a complete disaster, both in terms of timing and in terms of money. And as you just said, that's an $8 billion gap. You could be building all kinds of hospitals with that. You could be hiring tens of thousands of nurses for years. It's a massive price gap. And Metrolinx, just in general, has a terrible record of cost overruns. I know that many in BC can relate, but certainly here, we've seen Metrolinx as a complete disaster. And $8 billion, that's a heck of a lot of money. That could cut the HST here by 3 points. That's a lot of money. And so, we're talking about Metrolinx, and it's time for a change.
Cutting the HST by 3 points. That's music to my ears, especially as a person who is from Alberta, where there was no provincial sales tax, moving to Ontario, and now I'm getting dinged huge every time I go to the till. So I love that HST cut. That's music to my ears. And of course, everyone, when we're saying $8 billion cost overrun, right? 8 new hospitals is what that could build. That's not an eensy-teensy little cost overrun. That is huge. And look, if we're talking about a private sector contractor here working with some business, fired what? I don't know, Jay. How many seconds do you think before they get fired?
1 or 2. It would be pretty darn quick. And wait till you hear what they're blaming, Franco, for this disaster, for the over budget. They're blaming inflation. That's right. Inflation. Now, it's been hitting our wallets hard. It's true. Yes. I do go grocery shopping. Prices are up. Absolutely. But Franco, you've been in Ontario for a while now. I don't think we've seen 75% inflation in Ontario. It's been pretty darn high, but I don't think we've seen 75%. And so if that's what they're blaming, I don't know where they are. Maybe they're in Venezuela or something making these calculations, but we sure as heck don't have 75% inflation here. So to just blame the whole fiasco on inflation, that's just insulting to Ontarians. And of course, the other thing is, if you all of a sudden have a project that's almost 100% over budget, it's $8 billion all of a sudden more than it was supposed to be. There's still years until this project is finished. You could see more cost overruns. If a private business is trying to pursue a project and the project all of a sudden goes up in cost by some 75%, I think that private business would sit down and have a conversation at the table about how to scale back costs. But this is what Metrolinx doesn't do. It's because they're a government contractor. This seems to be the way government works. Things go way over budget, and they don't try to find a way to bring it back. They don't try to find a way to lower costs so that we're not seeing these massive overruns. There's been no attempt to do that. And, if you were doing a home reno and all of a sudden you had somebody who you hired to do the contracting job come to you halfway through the job and say, yeah, the price tag is going up by 75%, I'm pretty sure you're going to fire their butts and find somebody else to do the job. And, that's clear. That's clearly what has to be going on right now in the head of Doug Ford. He's got to be thinking about it, and he should. We need clear change in Ontario.
Okay, let me just jump in here because I got to say something. You seem fired up, Jay, you seem fired up, man. I can hear it in your voice. I'm sure our listeners can hear it in our voice. And like, okay, as you should be. I mean, an $8 billion cost overrun, give or take, that's huge. But just how fired up you are, I'm kind of sensing that this isn't the first time that they've really increased the cost on taxpayers' back, is it?
Oh, it sure isn't. I mean, this is the biggest dollar figure, but look, they were building the Eglinton Crosstown. This is a smaller LRT. It's over 5 years behind schedule, $400 million over budget. And then the poor towns of Burlington and Oakville. These are suburbs of Toronto. They're not crazy rich. They don't have all kinds of money. They agreed to build a railway bypass between the two cities. It was supposed to cost $60 million. Okay. And these are two relatively small cities. They're relying on the property taxes of hardworking people in both cities to pay for this. It was supposed to cost $60 million. It came in at $177 million, breaking the budgets of those two cities. So they have a terrible track record, Metrolinx. It's not just with the Ontario line, it's with the Eglinton Crosstown. It's how they screwed over Burlington and Oakville. And this is just 3 examples of a whole laundry list. And so that's why it's really time for Premier Ford to fire these guys as Ontario's transit contractor.
Yeah, and you know what the cherry on top is for taxpayers, as the cherry is, this is the cherry that's always on top for taxpayers, is that Metrolinx's CEO paid what, $500K, $500,000 a year. Every year he's been CEO, including every year these projects have gone, what, hundreds of millions of dollars over budget. Talk about out of touch. Talk about being rewarded for essentially failing at your job, or at least being paid handsomely for not doing a very good job when it comes to managing our money. But of course, like, look, I think you're making the case that Metrolinx is an absolute disaster here. But what about some other government transit contractors? Are there any others that are doing a better job?
Well, the short answer is no. We've seen all across the country major disasters. I'm sure a lot of people heard about Ottawa's LRT. That came over $1 billion over budget. There were scandals involving that in part helped lead to Mayor Watson not seeking re-election because of the ridiculous cost and the poor job politicians did in Ottawa overseeing those projects. And then I know our buddy Carson in BC is probably trying to say to me right now, hold my beer. We've had huge disasters from TransLink. Not only in Vancouver do you have to pay extra money every time you fill up your tank at the gas pump to give money to Metrolinx to help run the city's transit, but you also have 2 new lines that are being built right now. Right now, they're about $1 billion more than they were supposed to be if you combine the 2 cost overruns. So we see in Ottawa, we see in Vancouver, we've seen in Toronto, we've seen in Burlington, Oakville, just disaster after disaster. And you really have to ask yourselves, when are we going to stop relying on government contractors to deliver these projects when they go crazy over budget and they're just hammering taxpayers?
Jay, I think I heard you say Metrolinx when talking about Vancouver. Of course, you meant TransLink there. So I just wanted to clarify there. But I mean, look, the CTF has a long history of not exactly being best friends with TransLink out there in Vancouver. Isn't that right? Jay, when I asked you, hey, is there any other contractors that are doing any better in Canada? Immediately when I said that, I almost wanted to eat my own words, because I used to be the Alberta director, and I am not looking forward to hearing what the final tab is for the Green Line LRT if that ever even gets finished. So yeah, folks, I mean, look, this is a staggering tab, about $9 billion in just cost overruns, the cost of building 8 or so hospitals, depending on the price there. But look, the bottom line for all of this is that taxpayers are kind of getting screwed here, right? And governments and their contractors, it doesn't appear like they're being really honest about the full cost, or at least being completely upfront with taxpayers before they actually start the project. I mean, we've seen this happen, in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Vancouver, in my former neck of the woods in Calgary. I mean, pick a city. We've seen these exact same issues, right? So look, if these contractors like Metrolinx or like TransLink out there in Vancouver consistently fail, to offer proper value and diligence for taxpayers and keep the projects on budget, then they should be fired and they should be replaced with someone who can actually get the job done. Well, Jay, I love the enthusiasm. I love how fired up you are. I love the fight that you have for us in Ontario. Thanks, Jay, and keep up the great work out there.
You bet. Thanks, Franco.